Hey, welcome to the show. My name is Mike Phillips, and I am your host. This is the Leadership Toolkit, where we have collaborative conversations with great leaders from all kinds of different verticals of business. I have a very exciting, very dynamic, and very good friend that is a guest today. His name is Shawn Shonk. He's a pastor. He's been in management and leadership for many, many years. As long as you and I have known each other. So welcome to the show, Shawn. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, everybody. So honored to be here, Mike. Thanks for inviting me. It means a lot to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So just so we can lay the groundwork and so forth, and then we'll get into it. And so everybody knows, for those of you that have tuned into the show regularly, we do very little talking beforehand because we want to keep the gold live for the show like this. So Shawn and I, our background, I think we've known each other for 20 years now, something like that.
Yeah, right out, just about.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's crazy how time flies, man. And as long as I've known you, you've been very connected to your faith, very connected to people. And I think you brought some really good ideas and some conversation to bring up today. But before we get diving into that, if you don't mind share with everybody here, what business are you in right now? A little bit of your leadership background and experience or anything you'd like to share with everybody. So again, welcome to the show. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Shawn Shonk.
Yes, thank you so much. Really honored to be here. Mike, just seeing the guests that you've had, and then knowing you as a leader and as a friend, was a little surprised, honestly, to be invited to this with the caliber of people you've had. So just humbled and really grateful to be on here. My background, I come from both secular and sales management, in particular, business world background, but also faith. And faith has been really my primary goal, the faith sector, for years and years and years. And ultimately, even still, I'm bivocational. I'm a pastor. I oversee an organization that plants churches, which I'll talk about here in a second. But I tell everybody I'm a sales trainer at a company called PushPay, currently a sales training manager. And I tell everybody that I basically work at PushPay to support my ministry habit, because the ministry doesn't really pay the bills. Right. So I do both. But what I think is really interesting is that I'm passionate about both. And I love that PushPay actually sells to churches and it's church management stuff. So I get to combine the two worlds more closely than ever before while being bivocational. So that's a real joy for me and a pleasure. Really blessed by God on that. Primarily in leadership, I've been a pastor, I've been a manager, a leader in several different realms. But in 2017, I launched an organization called Encounter Global Ministries. And really what the vision behind this ministry or this organization was, is I heard a statistic. And the statistic is that the average pastor in like a third world country, primarily in Africa, who's leading a church, has the same religious education or equipping as somebody who's just gone to church in the United States off and on for about 2 years. So imagine you just start going to church, and 2 years from now, you'll be as equipped as an actual pastor in Africa. That was crazy to me. But the other thing that's crazy to me is if somebody in America wants to be a pastor, you almost have to go through the same level of education as like a doctor. Right. So we're talking tons and tons of money, education, student loans. And then let me tell you, a pastor's salary, unless you're a celebrity pastor, will never pay back the student loans. And so we have a real crisis, in first world countries as well, where the people who are getting into Christian leadership are really at such a disadvantage. So the idea behind Encounter Global Ministries was, let's help people who want to do the work of God do it affordably, and let's equip people all over the world to really lead with excellence inside of the church. So that's what we do. We help churches. Currently, we oversee 23 churches worldwide in 5 different nations. We plant churches. We oversee churches that need leadership and insight. We train pastors. I'll actually be in Africa later this year, training on the ground and doing some amazing things there. So that's my background. That's what the big project I'm working on now is, just growing the ministry. and wanting to be a better leader every day.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, and having watched you grow over many years, you and I worked together side by side for several years, about 20 years ago, and then we've
Mm-hmm.
our lives have passed each other. We used to joke like Sean's my doppelganger, right? Because I'm Michael. And so for many years we've been connected, but having the opportunity from an outside perspective to really watch you grow as a man and as a leader and as a manager in some of these different businesses, and certainly the church leadership as well, but has been really phenomenal and really exciting. And you've moved from somebody that I worked with or worked alongside to somebody that definitely I have looked up to at many
Wow.
times in my life. And so, when we started talking briefly, one of the items that you brought up, and I got to look it up here. And I think this is a good place to start because we all have these journeys that we go through in leadership, and
Definitely.
we start at one place and we think we're headed directly over here, right? This is where we're headed and that's where we're going. And I think from the outside, a lot of people, and I brought this up even on prior shows, a lot of people think that we've got it all figured out and we've got it all put together. And one of the things that you brought up kind of in our pregame, and again, like I said to everybody, our pregame is like 2 sentences, right? We keep it really open. But your comment, you said, let's talk about the role of vulnerability in leadership. And we can bring this up later of how to live in the fishbowl of leadership and that glass house, because I think every leader, regardless of level, we think people get to the top of the food chain, so to speak, in leadership, and that all of those things just go away, right? They dissipate because you've got it all figured out. And so tell me, I'm gonna let you take the lead here. When you talk about the role of vulnerability in leadership, what were you thinking, or what were you referring to when you sent me that line?
Yeah. Well, first I would start by saying that as leaders, I think it's very common that we become dehumanized oftentimes by the people who follow us. And what I mean by that is exactly what you just said. They just assume we have it all figured out. I remember being a little kid, 8, 9, 10 years old, and looking at the people like my aunts and my uncles who are in their 20s. And I remember thinking like, wow, they're grown-ups. Like they got life figured out. Someday I'm gonna be like them and it's all gonna, I'm gonna feel like an adult. And then I remember, being like 25, 26 and working alongside you, Mike, and just thinking like, I still feel like a kid.
Yeah.
I don't feel like a grown up. And now here I am 42 years old and I still feel like a kid. I'm sure everybody has a similar experience. Like you never really have life figured out. There's never a point where you're like, wow, like I got this thing now. Like I'm a master of life. We're all just students of life and students of our journey and our path. And yet we look at the people who have gone before us, just like that, 9-year-old Shawn, and we say, wow, they have it figured out. They got it, just like you mentioned earlier. And so we can oftentimes become dehumanized, and they lose our followers lose this element of, hey, Shawn, Mike, they're just people. And life is real. Life is hard. They struggle. They have wins. They have losses. And so, the question that I've posed as a leader and through some failures, frankly, is how much of that do I share with the people that follow me? And what is the risk and reward of sharing your life, of letting them actually see the human side of you? And then what's the risk and reward of not? Is there a cost if you allow them to keep that dehumanized perspective of who you are? And it's affected me profoundly in my journey of leadership.
That is deep. That's a really deep question when you're talking about what's the risk and reward of sharing it, but on the likewise, what's the risk and reward of not?
Right.
So from your experience, what's the greater? What's the answer? Right? We're going to solve this in like 5 minutes. But what becomes the answer? Because you and I knowing one another, and it's a different perspective a little bit, maybe, because I think in the leadership role, oftentimes the leaders that came before me were always like, no, you can't get on that personal level
right
with your staff. No, you can't go do this, or you don't want to reveal that. And they're speaking from the same lack of training that we had when we got into leadership, right?
100%,
And the reality is, over many years, like, you've gotten to know me as a person, I've gotten to know you as a person, certainly know our strengths, our weaknesses, all our vulnerabilities. But what has what have you learned from that? Have you decided to share, hey, here's where I'm lacking, or here's where I missed it, or here's what's your approach been?
Yeah, I think interestingly enough, Mike, I've erred on both sides too far. And I think at the end of the day, every leader has to decide this for themselves based on their role, based on their perception and the people that they have. But for me, I've undershared and been too rigid and been too robotic in my approach. And then I've overshared and let people become too familiar with me. But my first, interestingly enough, Mike, my first experience with a leader who was willing to get personal with me was you, when you were my sales manager in the car business. And I'll never forget when you picked me up to play golf. I was in my 3rd-story apartment, like this young buck. Is my first real professional job. And maybe we had worked together 2 months at this point. And you invited me to play golf on the weekend. And it didn't feel business at all. It felt personal, like friendship. And I remember being excited, but being nervous too. Like, what does this mean? Like, what is this? How, even asking the question, like, how personal can I get with my leaders? Which is probably a whole other topic. When you're talking about a 360-degree leader, how do you manage up in that way? Sure. But what was so crazy is you became a human to me. And because you were human to me, you were able to speak to my heart, not just my head. And leaders before you, I had leaders before you, sure, who made an impact that I remember, but you were the first leader that impacted my heart directly. And I didn't have to filter everything through my head to get to my heart. You were the first one that just was able to speak to my heart. And let me tell you, what was really impressive is that there were still times where you had to pull me aside and correct me. There were still times where we had,
you sitting in the rain at the picnic table. That was a serious deal. So here's that. Let me give some context.
Yeah, please.
Shawn had been in sales, and we had. I remember going golfing together. And it's crazy because the whole golfing experience. Amazingly, I'm no better now than I was then at golf.
Me either.
But the cool part of that was, and I remember that. I remember you and I we started that sort of tradition over the summers and so forth several times, and we would go and the unique part was, like you're saying, hey, it became a friendship. I felt like we still had those established roles, but likewise, I had a friend in you, and I was able to lean on you in the store like a friend. Hey, I need you to do this. And I think that led to the picnic table story. I remember you had been having a really off month. You remember this?
Oh yeah.
Shawn had been having an off month. He says, man, everybody that's coming in, I can't sell. People that are coming in, they don't want to buy. It was such a tough deal. And I remember it was like the breaking point when literally, I think you came to me and you told me you were counting customers that hadn't been able to buy. You said, I've talked to 24 or 25 people so far that couldn't buy.
It was 23. I still remember the number.
And then the crazy thing is, shortly after that conversation, you were sitting out at a picnic table in the rain. And I thought, man, God is just crying for your heart. That's what's happening right now, because it was like, it was. And so you and I had that conversation that we were able to have a real human conversation. I said, dude, you're and hopefully you're okay if I share this
Of
with
course,
folks.
yeah.
I think one of the things that I shared and that we were talking about, I said, man, I said, one, would you buy a car from you right now? Like, you're in a sad state, right? You're counting the people that can't buy, and you're literally sitting and having the world cry on you, right?
God's crying on me on the
Like
table.
literally. So you got to shift perspective. And I remember, now it's one thing to be able to coach someone and have that conversation briefly. But that was, it took some real humility and real willingness to learn from you to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to turn it around. And I think literally the next day you turned it around.
Yeah.
Literally, I know
I
we're
still
off on
ended
a
up being
tangent.
salesman of the month. And
Yeah.
on a short, really as a short month, I didn't sell a car for the first half of the month, and then still turned it around and made a paycheck. It was great. But you had that voice, Mike. You could talk to me in that state. And what was so powerful about that was that I could be vulnerable and humble with you. And I could share where I was really at without a fear of loss, of status, or because at the end of the day, our relationship wasn't just numbers and spreadsheets and business. There
Sure.
was more to it. And since I knew you cared about me as a person, I knew that when you were speaking to me and telling me hard truths, right? Like when you're down in the dumps, and somebody's telling you you're the reason you're down in the dumps, it can feel like somebody's kicking you while you're down. But I didn't feel that because I
Sure.
knew you were invested in me as a person. I wasn't just somebody who was going to make you a paycheck. So that was,
Absolutely.
yeah. So that was really the beginning of my journey of trying to really discover how personal should I get with my people.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so you said you've erred on the side, and I think that's always been for you and I. I mean, it's worked out for me selfishly. Like I said, I gained a great friend out of it over the years. Um, but you said you've erred on the other side too, of being
Yeah.
too vulnerable. And what is? Are you okay sharing that? What does that
Oh
mean?
yeah, absolutely. So a little background on me, so I've gone through a pretty messy breakup in my family, and lost a wife, and um, like we got divorced, not lost. But that was messy, especially when you're a pastor and you're in the
Mhm.
faith world. It's like the red A on your to be a divorced pastor is a really, really bad thing. And I held on as long as I possibly could. Um, Partially selfishly, so I didn't have to suffer in my leadership, which was the wrong thing in hindsight, not the right reason to hold on to something.
Sure.
Um, but what ended up happening, so one of the big pushes that I had starting Encounter Global Ministry is this idea that, and I'll go a little bit into faith for a moment, but this idea that Jesus really took some of the most lowly people, like the misfits of his time, to make his disciples and ultimately his apostles, who the church still exists today because of the work that they did
Sure.
2,000 years ago. So you're talking about effective leadership. Their legacy continues on 2,000 years later and bigger than ever. That's phenomenal leadership. So I was looking at his model of leadership and saying, wow, he took people who didn't believe in themselves, didn't think they could accomplish anything, fishermen and tax collectors who were like the scum of the earth back then. And he taught them to believe in something bigger than in themselves and to believe that they could accomplish something well beyond themselves. So when I'm teaching young people who feel called by God, what I'll tell them oftentimes, I'll say, listen, if your calling doesn't intimidate you, and doesn't scare the absolute hell out of you, it's not God. God calls
Mm.
people to things that they could never accomplish when they look in the mirror and say, can I do this? And so somewhere in that, we have to teach people how to believe in themselves and to believe that they can do things beyond what they can actually do. And so a big part of what I did, and the mistake that I made, to answer your question, is I taught a lot of people in my organization to believe in themselves, through personal relationship, through them really seeing my life, and the things that I could do, and the things that I did. Yet I'm a man, I'm human. And so they got to
Sure.
see that vulnerability in me. But what I forgot to teach them is humility. And I forgot to teach them that just because you can doesn't make you like more than just still a person. And so I ended up losing quite a few followers, and really ended up destroying one of my churches, because when I went through this divorce and they saw me struggling, all of a sudden to them, they were like, oh, my leader is weaker than I am. And so now I can become the new leader, basically. And he doesn't deserve to be in leadership anymore because I have my life together and he doesn't. And it caused a huge rift. And it was very, very painful for me and for a lot of people, unfortunately, when that took place. So by letting them in, and letting them have too much of a say in my life, so to speak,
Sure.
it ended up destroying a lot of what I had built and what the Lord had built through me for years. Yeah.
Man, that's tough. So
Hmm.
let me ask you a question. Because you said, hey, I forgot to teach humility.
Yeah.
Can you teach humility? How do you teach humility?
Yeah, that's a great question. One that has kept me up at night many nights since then. um, I would say I've come to a place in my life where, and in my leadership, where I don't teach it; it has to exist. And what I mean by that is, yeah, I still believe in the misfits. I still look for those who have never accomplished anything and say, let's change the world together. That's my favorite people group, right?
Sure.
But if I don't see a sense of, hey, or an acknowledgement of I've failed in the past, um, I'm needy of help. I need support around me. Um, I want to do great things, but I know I can't do it alone. If I don't see that right off the cuff, that's a filter that tells me these people aren't ready for what we have to offer. And it's hard. It's hard to pass on people who are hungry. You can be
Sure.
hungry, but if you're not hungry and humble, you're not right for our movement.
That's strong. Well, and I think, to help uncover some humility, I think there's two things that have to take place, just from my perspective, as we're talking about this. One, as a leader, you have to know the person. You have to
Hmm.
be willing to get to know the person, like the human behind the staff member, the human behind the facade, right? You have to be
Right.
able to connect with them, like you said earlier. Hey, we were able to connect, and I could speak to your heart, and I'm very humbled by that. But I had no idea. Like thank you for saying that, and it's like that's touching to me to hear that.
Hmm.
And but I do think that it's relevant that you've got to know the person to be able
Totally.
to really coach them. And two, I think as a leader, the only way you can do this is to know them, but you've got to ask good questions, right? You have to lead
Yes.
people to it through questioning. You can't just say, well, hey, this is what you have to do. Like when we're saying, when Shawn's saying, and I'm not, hopefully not putting words in your mouth, like you have to teach humility. You have to teach humility through asking the right questions.
Hmm.
You have to ask somebody, hey, do you really think that this is the direction something should go? Do you really think that you have provided the best effort that you could? Do you really think that, and turn it around some so that people do have an introspective look like, well, gosh, have I really done that? And I think we err as leaders. We want to ask the question and then we want to give the answer. Right.
That's the challenge. Yeah. That's the hard thing.
Right. We want to we want to ask the question and then we pause. And if the person doesn't have the immediate answer, oftentimes we want to provide what our perspective is to them.
Hmm.
And I think it's important as leaders that we acknowledge we don't always have the answers either. And sometimes the most powerful answers, especially for other individuals, has to come from within them. You know, um, Becca on the side says hungry and humble. I love that. Absolutely. Hungry and humble.
That's right.
I think that's a really good way to look at it, especially when you're moving somebody into a role like what you're looking for, Shawn, with it,
Hmm.
within faith-based leadership within the church. I think people have to be hungry and humble. I think, I mean, that applies so many places. It applies in business too. You have a
Hmm.
lot of people in business that are hungry and not humble, or they're humble and they're accepting of what comes at them, but they're not hungry enough to go after it. I mean, I
Yeah,
think
without both, there's no breakthrough, or at least there's limited breakthrough. You can be hungry and not humble, and you might see success, but we all know that ceiling is going to crash at a certain point,
sure.
because you're going to hit storms in business, in life, whatever it is. And without the humility and the ability to, call a spade, you're going to crash down. And I think, Mike, that's why there's so few. When you look at like who are those leaders who actually left a legacy,
Sure.
leadership in general has an expiration date. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people who rise to meteoric heights in leadership, and then eventually their character, their lack of humility, something causes them to crash down, right? We've seen it time and time again in business and unfortunately in faith. Pastors who fall, who are celebrities at one point or another. But then there's the people like the Billy Grahams, the Abraham Lincolns, the people that you look back, you say they left a legacy of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And always humility is one of the things that you would use to describe him if you had to describe him in 5 words. So I think the role of humility in leadership is tremendous. And then also in your people that you're really training to be leaders.
I think that's really strong. It's interesting as we're coining phrases here. When you were saying they rise to meteoric heights, right? We got hungry and humble so far out of this episode. I think it's really easy to fall from meteoric to mediocre. Right?
Absolutely. I think that's a good
There's
way
another one.
to
M&Ms, right? It's easy to fall from that for anybody in business or leadership or management, regardless of what the vertical is. It's easy to fall from grace, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And the reality is, it's so often, I think one thing that leaders don't acknowledge well is and you alluded to this when you were talking about one of your pain points a minute ago, and you said, man, you had shared and been vulnerable, and then there were some of that stuff fell apart. One of the things that leaders need to take the time to acknowledge is it's the followers that put you there. Right?
I'm curious what you mean by that.
I mean that without somebody following you, you're not really a leader. Like you may lead yourself and so forth, but I think so often that leaders, they do get the title, and then they think, and again, I've talked about this on several shows. They get the title and they go, well, hey, this is where I'm headed. But the reality is, beyond the title, you have to have all the things that you're talking about. Like you have to have the humility, you have to have the connection, you have to have a responsibility to people, because if you don't maintain and keep those people there, it's easy to suddenly be back from ground zero,
Totally.
So one of the other things that you brought up and you talked about, and I like this also, you said how to live in the fishbowl of leadership and the glass house we throw rocks in. So can you, and I'm going to repeat that because, like I said, the 2 sentences when I send to anybody in a leadership role, I'll always put it out there and I say, hey, what do you have something? Do you have some expertise? Do you have something that's speaking to your heart right now that you want to touch on? And Shawn sent me those 2 sentences. So I'm going to repeat that second one. You said how to live in the fishbowl of leadership and the glass house we throw rocks in. And I just want to see where we go with that. It's a strong statement. So expand on it some.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really referencing back to this, tragedy in my leadership. I mean, I'm speaking more from failure than success today.
Sure.
And that's a reality of leadership too, that I just want to point out, is that we're going to fail, but we fail, then we fail better, right? That's how we grow as leaders. But my question is, do your people know that you're going to fail? And do they know what is expected when you fail? So for instance, what's really interesting, forgive me, but I'm going to use a baseball analogy. So as the leader,
no forgiveness needed.
Okay, great. As the leader, you're the umpire. You're calling balls and strikes as you see them. And that's your job. You have to tell somebody when they do good, and you have to tell somebody when they need to improve. Sure. That's just reality. But oftentimes as a leader, we're also the pitcher. And sometimes we're the one throwing the balls and the strikes. And so first and foremost, you have to be willing to call a ball if you're the one that's pitching. And I see so many leaders make this mistake that they try to cover up their mistakes, or they try to just not talk about it. It just becomes this giant elephant in the corner of the room, where everybody else is talking about it when the leader's not present. When the leader's present, oh, we don't talk about such and such failure or this, and part of being a leader is you're going to go, you say all the time, lead from the front. You're going to go in front of people. You're going to go and tread paths that haven't been created yet. And when you do that, you're going to fail. It's embarrassing.
Sure.
Sometimes that failure is painful. And, my question is that to myself now, does my team know what to do when I fail? First of all, do they know when I fail? Of course they do. And we're absolutely fooling ourselves if we think that they don't know and that they don't talk about it and that it's not this huge, event in your organization. Sure. When you fail. And not if, but when you fail. They know about it. The second thing is, do they know you know about it? And then the third thing is, do they know what to do? Have you taught them what to do when you fail? And what that means? What does failure mean? Truly, to an organization, to an individual. And let me tell you, if your people don't know how to fail well, your organization has a lid on it, because that means if they don't know how to fail well, they're not going to experiment. They're not going to try new things. They're not going to innovate. Fear of failure is what ends up taking place more often than not. So yeah, to answer your question, we live in a glass house as leaders. And yet we have to call other people out for mistakes, and we have to correct them and guide them, right? It's not always like yelling and screaming. Obviously, that's not good leadership, but calling the balls and strikes as they actually are, knowing that we've probably made similar mistakes, and we might even make a similar mistake in front of the same person that we're calling out for the mistakes or the things that they're doing. It's an interesting dynamic, and it's one that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. But I would just challenge leaders, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And here's something I'll tell you. I have never in my life lost leadership because I was honest and vulnerable about my mistakes. Well, one time in my life have I lost leadership because of that. That's the fear, right? If I tell my leader or the people that I'm leading, hey, I blew it. Here's where I totally whiffed. They're going to say, oh, you're not worth following anymore. And we get insecure. But we have to deal with that insecurity as leaders and be willing to say, hey, I whiffed. I blew it in this. And sometimes as a leader, that means you got to do it in front of everybody. And it can be humbling. But if you already have that humility, that cloak of humility already on you, it's not that painful. Make it a discipline in what you do. But I have lost leadership by not calling my ball a ball and not bringing it up in the room. And That's been painful.
Well, and I think one of the benefits is when you're willing to accept that, when you're willing to call the ball a ball, when you're willing to say, hey, I made a mistake, it takes away the power from the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
I mean, people can still talk about it, but so what? Right? It's like anything else in life. When you're willing to share and talk about your mistakes and say, hey, man, this is what happened and I own it. But more importantly than focusing on the error, more important than focusing on the mistakes, one thing that I think makes great leaders is you acknowledge it, but then you start to provide solutions, right? You start to talk about, okay, well, how do we move on? How do we move past it? And then one thing that gets you the bonus points, so to speak, right? The extra base hit, not the home runs, but it gets you a base hit, is when you acknowledge that and then you ask your people, hey, what do you see that could move us past this? What do you see that could move me past this? And that doesn't mean that you always do it. One of my favorite quotes is from Colin Powell, and he said, this is probably paraphrasing, but where he says, hey, debate sharpens me. But once we've made a decision, we all move forward as if that decision was your own. And so I think it's one of those things that when you acknowledge that mistake, you open that up to some discussion, and you acknowledge and are willing to listen to your people. Once you all make a decision, you're able to move forward together. And I think people will gain respect for you for that. Couple quick comments. Becca says, failure means to grow. If you're not failing, you have nowhere to grow into a better leader, team member, or person. I think that's absolutely
That's huge.
spot on.
Wow.
From Twitch, we've got a comment. He says, Mike, and I'm going to pose this question to you, Mr. Shonk.
Oh my gosh.
Because it's a good one. And I'm happy to debate on this. But from Twitch, he says, I posted a tweet at the bottom of the Twitch page that says, a leader can't be successful unless others want them to be. I shared that quote a couple weeks ago. And it says, if that's true, why is a guy like Elon Musk, who rules with an iron fist, so successful?
That's a good one. Well, I think, first of all, there might be some debate on if Elon Musk actually rules with an iron fist or not, which we probably isn't helpful to even get into today. But I would pose the question, why was Hitler successful?
Ouch.
Yeah, people wanted him to be. Why did people want Hitler to be successful? And what does that mean to us as leaders today, right? There's some controversy around that. At the end of the day, if you're thinking short term, if you're thinking, how can I be successful right now? Sometimes the iron fist is what it takes to get to from here to there, like the old Bill Hybels, how do you get from here to there, leadership, thing. Sometimes that's the quickest path. But is it the most long-term path? Is it if you're thinking legacy, again, back to my comment about the Abraham Lincolns, the Billy Grahams, the people who have left a legacy of leadership, probably not going to get there. It's going to be interesting to see how history writes Elon Musk in the books. Is he this meteoric leader, or is he a mediocre leader at the end of the day? We'll see. And we don't really know what goes on in the boardrooms. We know what people put on social media. We get to see some of his stuff. It's a little crass for my appetite when it comes to being a leader. I've learned over time, you can challenge people, but you gotta really balance grace and truth. And what I mean by that is yes, you have to be honest and you have to set firm, hard boundaries. But you also have to be soft in the approach sometimes and take the reality that you're dealing with a human being who's valuable, who's made in the image of God, who's loved. He or she is somebody's son or daughter, somebody's mom or dad, brother, sister. Someone loves this person and would die for this person. And if nothing else, as a pastor, Jesus did die for that person. And who am I to devalue them with my words? Who am I to devalue them as their leader? They provide value, even if they didn't provide the value I wanted to see at that time for my organization. How selfish of me to dehumanize them in that approach, right? But that being said, I could use them for a time. But the question is, am I using people to get what I want? The ends justify the means. Or am I developing them to create a legacy and something that's going to outlive me? And as a leader, we have to ask that question at some point. We're not going to live forever. And we're not going to be leaders forever, because someday I might be in a nursing home and ain't nobody going to follow me if I can barely walk, talk, or do anything.
Well, they'll follow you, but for a different reason.
Yeah, exactly, because they're pushing me around, right? The question is, did the vision and did the legacy outlive me? And I don't think that leading with an iron fist is going to cause that to take place. It didn't happen for Hitler.
Well, and like you said at the beginning, where he says, if this is true, then why is a guy like Elon Musk, who rules with an iron fist, so successful? I think one of the illusions that people accept is, well, if this person is a leader for some, then they should be a leader for all. And that's not true either, right?
Totally.
Like you've got to, for any leadership role, you got to find your tribe. Right. There are going to be people that will walk through the flames for you. They'll follow you anywhere. And then there's other people looking at the people walking through the flames going, they're insane. What are they doing? Why are they following that person?
Very true,
do they realize he's on fire? Right. and so it's like, yeah, I'm on fire because of that meteoric rise. We're headed there. Right?
That's right. We're meteors.
But the reality is, so when it's GZ Doctor Forever that posts the comment. The thing is, you may find him a mediocre leader. You may find him to be somebody ruling with an iron fist. That's not a way that you need to be led or something that you follow. In fact, based on the comment, like, it grates you the wrong way, right?
Right. Yeah.
But people need to be led different ways. I was talking on a show a few weeks ago, and I want to say about 3 weeks ago, and we were talking about, I think it was maybe with Ian. I said, well, it's like the Vince Lombardi, right? Mm-hmm. Vince Lombardi took a very mediocre team in the 60s and built them to meteoric heights, where he has the legacy that we still talk about when it comes to football. I use the football analogy, you use baseball, right? But the reality is, if he took those 11 players and he says, okay, here's how I'm going to go coach these guys, he did not coach all 11 people. He did not coach the entire team the same way. He coached each individual as an individual, because you had to speak to people differently. And there are people today that'll look back and say, yeah, Vince Lombardi, he wasn't a great coach. He was all right. I've heard his name. I know who he is. And that's why it's interesting where you say it'll be interesting to see how the history books write Elon Musk, because people will be like, yeah, I've heard of the guy, but he's a great leader for some. He's mediocre for others, and some people flat out despise him. I think that goes for anyone that is going to be in a leadership role. You have to expect that there's going to be people that love you and people that hate you, or people that don't love you. And the reality is, that group of people that do love you and think that you're doing the right thing and you're headed the right way and they'll follow you everywhere, that's going to be a smaller group of people than the people that disagree with your direction.
So good. I think there's another point too in here, Mike, of situational leadership, if you guys are all familiar with that. But basically, situational leadership is saying, depending on where your followers are in their journey of growth, you have to actually change and adapt as a leader. You can't be a one-size-fits-all leader, which is to your point with Vince Lombardi, that he coached 11 people 11 different ways. And what I often tell people that I'm training to be a leader is, you can't give your people what they deserve. You have to give your people what they need. That's love. That's leadership. Sometimes they actually need an iron fist. Sometimes they deserve an iron fist, but it's not what they need. They need love. They need care. They need hey, you haven't been performing, but I don't care about that. Tell me, are you okay? Is everything okay in your life? Like, is your health okay? Like, sometimes they need that, even though in your heart of hearts, they deserve that iron fist, right?
Sure.
But situational leadership is saying, like, hey, there's a time to be directive as a leader. There's a time to just stand up in front and like Hitler, pound your fist and say, here's what we're going to do. And come hell or high water, we're going to achieve this. And then there's a time to be a leader that's more consensus, where you're bringing in, like you mentioned earlier, like, hey, someone speak into this. What am I not seeing? What do we need? But if you are high consensus with a brand new person in a role, they're going to feel unsupported. Like, that might be loving to somebody who's been in the role 15 years and is an expert already. And they see that as great leadership. Oh, your consensus, you're asking my opinion. That's phenomenal leadership. But to somebody who's brand new, it's like, hey, tell me what I need to do today. I'm lost.
I just showed up. I need the roadmap. You're going, no, we're drawing the map today. They're like, no, I need the map.
Like your first day, and they're like, okay, so how are we going to change the company to be more profitable? It's like, I don't know. I just started, right? Like, people are in different situations. And the powerful leader is the one that can quickly diagnose where they're at and recognize, I'm going to give this person what they need, not what they deserve. And I'm going to give them the leader that's going to actually move the needle for where they're at in their journey and personalize it.
That's awesome. That's a really good statement there. You said, I'm going to give people the leader that they need where they're at in their journey. I think that's a real good foundation for like servant leadership. Like, hey, I'm actually here to serve you as a leader and help grow you through everything that I'm doing. So we're kind of coming down the pipe. We got 10 minutes left or whatnot. I'm going to ask you a question here.
Yeah.
Ben says, love this. Completely agree. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi, Ben.
So you mentioned earlier, and I'm gonna put you back on the spot again because I like this, because you have such good answers, man. It's such good stuff. Everybody should watch this episode. You said earlier, hey, if we were referring to leaders in history that had vision and legacy, humility would be one of the top 5 things.
Mhm.
For you, what are the other 4?
The other 4, success is one. A leader actually has to get results. You don't leave a legacy if you don't ever actually succeed. So you're going to fail as a leader. Like I'm sharing some of my failures today, like completely blew up our flagship church, had this really good thing going, and now it's, totally being reinvented because of this failure. But at some point I have to succeed.
Sure.
And thankfully, we have so many other great things going on. If you don't actually see results at some point, Vince Lombardi wouldn't be on the trophy if he never won the Super Bowl with his
Correct.
team. So I would say humility, there's success, the ability to communicate. A leader is a communicator. If you're a leader who's not working on communication and constantly improving your ability to communicate, which, by the way, communication is a two-way street. It's not only the ability to talk at somebody and get your point across. I've seen way too many leaders err on that side. Like they're the loudest in the boardroom. They can surround themselves with people who love to listen to them.
Because they're using the iron fist.
That's right. But then you're an orator, right? You're a professor. You're not a leader. You're just a teacher. And teachers are great, and we need them. There's a place, but that's not the leader. The leader also listens. The leader knows how to ask questions, to your point earlier, Mike, which I thought was phenomenal. A leader is a brilliant question asker. And then the ability to listen to the answers to those questions and lead them in that way based on that. I think that's huge. Let me see, that was 3, right? I think
that was 3. I got humility, I got success, I got communication. You owe me 2 more. I'm taking notes more. Just so you guys know. You guys should be taking notes too, but I'm giving Shawn, while I orate here for a moment, I'm giving him time to think. So humility, success, and communication. What are 2 more great qualities that leaders should have?
Yeah, I would say one is confidence. But maybe not in the sense that somebody would hear that and have the right connotation. When I say confidence, I mean knowing thyself. You actually know who you are. You know the good, you know the bad, you know the ugly. You're honest with yourself and you're honest with others. So what I mean by that confidence is saying, like, here, I am who I am. Mm-hmm. I'm confident enough in who I am that I know I have weaknesses. Therefore, I'm going to surround myself with people who have strengths that are my weaknesses. And I'm going to allow them to speak in, and I'm going to allow them to have a voice. Everything doesn't have to be run through Shawn. I made that mistake in my ministry before, and it was so frustrating, And I remember, a mentor of you and I, Joe, would tell the story of the, should I make a half or a whole pot of coffee at the end of the day? It was like, I think back to that all the time, and I say, man, it's crazy that I learned that from him, and that stuck right here. And I still have made that mistake where you have to run everything through me. Have the confidence in yourself, but then also the confidence in your people to let them do what they want to do, right? I think that's huge. The last thing is going to actually bring it full circle, Mike. Okay. Vulnerability, being a human, letting yourself be known to a certain degree, and teaching people what to do with that knowledge, right? You can't just throw your stuff out there. You have to also lead them in what to do with the knowledge of who you are. Being vulnerable, being real, being authentic. Maybe those are 2 different things. I think they're the same thing. If you're authentic, people are going to see the real you, and that means that they're going to see not just your highlight reel, but they're going to see the bloopers too. And
sometimes it's not bloopers,
right? I can count probably on one hand the leaders that I know who I could say I have an accurate assessment of who they are. You're one of them. The good, the bad, the ugly, everything. But I can tell you scores of leaders who they've only allowed me and only allowed us the ability to see their highlight reel. And though I might be impressed, and though I might even name drop or be excited to talk about them or whatever the case is, they're not my leader at the end of the day. At the end of my life, they didn't lead me. They didn't inspire my heart. They didn't change my life in any way. I don't care if I'm famous, Mike. I don't care if I'm the world renowned in anything. But what I do care about is at the end of my life, our life's different. Have people's lives been improved? Has the world changed, even if it's microscopic in nature? Is the world a better place because I lived here? And I can't do that being fake. It's impossible to actually move the needle being a fake version of yourself.
100%. God, that is such a good way to sum it up. And I think, as you're saying here, where you're saying, hey, is the world a better place? Did I lead people? I think one of the things that it's easy, some leaders, not all, it's easy for any of us as leaders to lose sight of what is the real mission. You know, we get in and we go, well, like, you know, because we end up getting sidetracked for stature. You end up getting sidetracked for the title. You end up getting those things that are like, it makes you look good. It gives you more of that highlight reel. Like you said, I'm taking words from you because I think that's really just spot on. But the reality is, when you say, did you lead people, are they further down the path today than when they met you? Like that's something for me that's always spent.
Wow.
Like, are they and not just down the path, but like, are they further down their path? Are they getting closer to fulfilling their purpose, to being their best person? You just brought up, for years, and it's so funny, the pot of coffee story.
Yeah.
You know, because it's the same thing. It's had the same impact. There's two things that always stand out. I shared this on one of my first shows here and Joe asked me this question. You were working for me at the time. I don't know that I ever shared this with you, but he asked me at point blank, like, hey, and I was having a rough time as a leader. And he says, well, let me ask you a question. Would you work for you right now in the state that you're in? And I'm like, oh man, that
hits you right in the gut, doesn't it?
Yeah. Somebody outside sees something that I didn't. So man, I think that's so powerful, Shawn. So there's his 5. It's humility, right? You have to be willing to be humble. Success. I absolutely agree with you. At some point, you've got to see some wins. You got to put some points on the scoreboard.
Totally.
Good communication. You touched on this, and I know I'm repeating this, but it just in a different manner. Communication is not just what you say, but how somebody receives it. Confidence in yourself. You know, that that internal confidence to be able to spill over to the outside, and then vulnerability, which we've talked a lot about today. So, gosh, really good stuff, Shawn. You know, I would, any final thoughts, any final nuggets of information? I think that you've shared so much valuable information for people that are existing leaders. I think that's one of the things that, to me, that really speaks to, because I've been in leadership for a long time, and we start going down that path, and sometimes we got to throw the brakes on and really assess where we're at and what can we learn from others and so forth. So I think that's really valuable. And certainly people that are new to leadership that may be tuning into this show, I think you've shared, you've been really vulnerable and just excellent at sharing your experiences to be able to help grow other people on this. So any other tidbits before we close?
Yeah, I think I would just like to speak to the leaders who might be in a situation that I'm in. Like it's interesting to be on a leadership podcast where I'm probably in one of the deepest pits as a leader that I've been in. I'm still rebuilding a lot of what was lost and was broken because of mistakes I made and because of the situation in my household, etc. I would just say to any leaders who might be there, failure and loss is not the end. And it doesn't define you. And so I would just say, you know, your successes don't define you and your failures don't define you. What defines you is, what do you do in those situations when the everything is working perfectly and you're crushing it and you're on top of the world, that meteoric rise, that's hard to say. What do you do with that? Are you humble? Do you give credit where credit is due? That speaks so much more to who you are as a leader than, hey, I got the results. But on the flip coin, and so many of us are here and no one talks to us because they just kind of forget about us when we're failing or when we're struggling or when we're really, you know, running through the mud, so to speak, to get to the other side. You are also not defined by your failures or the lack of success that you might be seeing now. And, you know, Mike was surprised. You heard him say earlier that he was surprised at the impact that he had in my life just because we went golfing and what took place. You never know who's watching, and you never know the lives that you're changing. Just as you're being you. That's what a leader is being authentic, being you. You know, the Bible tells us to be ready in and out of season. Keep being a leader. Always be a leader. Keep your head up. Don't give up. Don't don't you dare give up, because all failure is an opportunity to learn and grow. And you're going to be better next time. And it all wasn't lost, because lives were changed. People were impacted. Something positive came out of it.
That's so good, man. That is so good. And thank you for sharing all of that. As we close out here this afternoon, Becca throws another question out here. She says, what's a good leadership you both can suggest for me?
Leadership book?
Yep.
Wow. There's so many that I think of. I'll just tell you this. And Mike, you might agree with me. Like the John Maxwell books, the law, irrefutable laws. If you're just starting to get into leadership, no book has made more of an impact on me as a leader and how I form and formulate my leadership than that book right there.
Yep. I absolutely concur. Without asking Shawn, that was going to be mine. John Maxwell, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of the Leadership. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely, one of my favorite leadership books of all time. Agree with you. Well, with that, Shawn, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really, really appreciate you. Just phenomenal insight, phenomenal sharing for everybody here in the audience. I will tell you, for anybody who's out here, and I'll have to have you back on the show again. So I appreciate you very much, man.
Yeah.
All right. And for everybody else here, that is another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. Do me a favor, make sure, share this episode because it was awesome. Make sure and give it a thumbs up. Make sure that you, subscribe here on YouTube. I do this every Wednesday at 12:05 Mountain Time. That's 2:05 Eastern. I've got an absolutely phenomenal booking of guests coming up over the next few months. I would encourage you, tell a friend, bring them out. We spend 45 minutes to an hour just jamming on leadership. And I love this because there is so much goodness that comes out of it. So many insights, so much good training. I can't say enough. And thank you again to my guest, Shawn, today. Thank you to my previous guests. It's been a really great experience so far. And I look forward to seeing you back here next week for the Leadership Toolkit. We'll talk to you soon, everybody.